Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to get started on our leadership workshop. This workshop is going to be a little bit different than what you might expect. The goal of this workshop is we'll introduce a little bit of leadership theory, but then we're going to actually go through activities. And the idea is to try and teach through having you do things, some of the harder skills to teach for leadership. What is leadership to you?
Being a member of a group while also helping facilitate a more organized group.
That's a good definition. Any other answers? Noid.
A leader sometimes chairs and facilitates rather than just telling people what to do.
Justin.
Leaders are the individuals that are at the end of the line accountable for the objectives and goals of a group or organization.
And go ahead.
In some versions of philosophy, leadership could be described as either the person that everyone ultimately serves, or in reverse, the one that the servant of all.
That's a really good comment. And we'll actually be covering that a little bit later. So hold those thoughts.
Yeah.
So I like all of your definitions. If I came up with a personal definition, my definition of a leader would be something like a person who has a vision that gathers other people around them to accomplish something. There's actually been studies on leadership, and there is no one best model of leadership. There's various different models, and in the studies, there's been conflict of, well, which one's better? It seems to be very dependent on circumstance. So it depends on time, place, and just, well, it depends, like what's going on, which type of leadership is going to be ideal. So I'm going to summarize some of the broad topics of leadership styles. And you may hear other leadership styles. There's a lot out there, but these are some of the core ones that I feel have a lot of value. The big division is in ancient times, you had value ethics. It's the idea of somebody embodies some sort of value, some sort of virtue. And that's what makes them a good leader. On the flip side, you have Machiavellianism, which is more of a case of you go through and you use circumstances to your advantage to accomplish the goal. I have personal beliefs about this in that I highly value value ethics. I think it's very important. And this goes back to antiquity. The Machiavellian view also existed back then, but came into the forefront more recently in history. And I would describe this as more managers. So on the slide here, you see leaders is an ideal you live up to, and then people choose to follow, versus managers. And I don't want to speak too much about managers, but it's methods to be implemented, people to manipulate and manage. Managerial skills are very important. Leaders will have them as well. So it's not a case of it's black, white, but if you've ever had a really, really bad boss, you'll know what I'm talking about. Did you want to say something?
By value ethics, do you mean like the idea of Plato of like eudaimonia or whatever?
I'm not aware of that, but probably, since the ancient Greeks were very fond of value ethics. Okay. I'm dividing this into 4 leadership styles. Caveat on this slide, actually, because Putin's up there, this may be a controversial figure. This was made before all of the current conflict in the world, but it still fits very strongly. So the first style is authority. You can think of authority as like king or person in charge or CEO. They rule through their title. They rule through the authority that's given to them. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be, but it is a form of leadership. There's some advantages to it. It's efficient decision-making. It's great in emergencies. It's one of the most common forms of leadership. And it's also really easy to abuse. Each of these images displays various places where you might see this leadership style. The next category of leadership is character. This one kind of aligns with the value ethics we were talking about. It's a person embodies some set of values. And because of those values, other people will follow them. They lead by example. It could be servant leadership, which is something people may have heard of. The values can be cultural in origin and different, just depending on context, which encompasses a whole group of more specific leadership styles. Nuit actually took a picture of a training we got from the ICC about leadership. You can see things about likability, having eye contact, curious learning, treat people the way they need to be treated. These are all examples of character leadership.
Is likability an overall arching trait, or is it a individual trait? Because it sounds like it was a part of the list, but it's set up on the slide as a overall. Like a general.
Let's turn this to the group. What do you guys think likability is?
So just to clarify, I captured different aspects that the training had and put together. But to answer his question, what was your question?
Is it a category or is it a specific quality?
It can be both. Because the reason I say likability can be both is look at it from a person trying to get a job. An interviewer may see whether a person is likable enough to be a cultural fit for the company. And then the other aspect is likability in the sense that is this person likable enough to be a company? So at least those two, so both, that I would say both.
Okay.
It's a great philosophical question. The next category of leadership that I'd like to talk about is competence. Competence is where somebody is skilled at something and therefore people follow them. A great example of where you see this is actually entertainment. You have musicians, you have singers, you have actors, or even schools. You have people who are very knowledgeable in their PhD of whatever subject they're in. And because they're good at something, people will follow them. There's some downsides to this form of leadership. Oftentimes, a person who's good in their specific field is not going to be as competent outside of their field. So we have some great examples up here. If you recognize some of these people, this is a professor. We have I believe a rapper. We have a teacher. We have a sports coach. We have some sort of specialist with a vial, I think. Is that a vial or shot? Something like that. Go ahead.
So won't this be describing to the idea of like the survival of the fittest?
Maybe. The last style of leadership I'd like to point out. This one I think is actually the most powerful of all the leadership styles. It's leadership through vision. Vision is that you have this idea, literally this vision of how things are to be or to change, and you're able to articulate that, and then people catch that vision and then follow it, and they go through to try and accomplish it. Some of the historical greats can be categorized by having a vision. I kept the people here pretty tame, but there's also some leaders who led through vision who were also terribly evil. Examples of this: Hitler, you can think of Lenin, leaders like that. You also have like Martin Luther King and Gandhi, the founding fathers. If you talk about how we look back towards them, they had a vision, and then that's how people started to follow through and follow them. It often has the greatest impact for good and bad. You may think of some current political leaders as leading through vision. What of those leadership styles do you think you embody? In case you've forgotten, we talked about vision, we talked about competence, we talked about character, and we talked about authority.
I'll start. I think of all those things, I probably have the most, for myself, vision. I think I see, I'm always in like my la la land. I'm like, it should be like that, or like, why is this the way it is? And I try to push that narrative, and hopefully get people to be on board with that. Like how I'm always on about our network security seems to be more imbued, thank you for sharing that word, with the department programs. So I guess as president moving forward, that's gonna be the vision that I'm pushing. I give 2 more semesters, maybe we could lay the groundwork on stuff for that.
Yeah, it's kind of like a personal question. Are we treating them as mutually exclusive?
They're not mutually exclusive. You may have multiple attributes.
Because I think it's mostly just, when you're doing it, because I can see a leader who has a vision who goes to whoever their expert on that topic is for that thing, and then considers to put out orders to the workers to follow in that kind of vision.
Okay.
I was like personally, I'd say like the competence category, and that's also what I'd say like I tend to also look for in a leader. Just because like for me, it's like I want a leader who can, lead us somewhere, but also like have knowledge about it and help to like help out with that thing as well. But, like, I guess in our software engineering project, we had like a designated leader. Like I hope they could like give us direction on the project, but also help make the Android part of it, or like help out the group and stuff like that. I want them to know what they're talking about.
You and me are very much alike that way. Noid, Marcos?
Sure. For me, it's like use whatever works in that particular situation. As a meaning, like I could be visionary like MLK, but then have someone underneath me that's better at the strategies. Because I look at some of the examples that you put there, like MLK, right? Great visionary, but then when he wanted the one protest, he had like a team, like that were great managers at executing which protest could I do, where should I go, so forth, so on. So my point is, there's bits and pieces of whatever works in the team, and I think correlates to the software projects, because what we see on campus and virtually and physically on campus is a reflection of the real world, where we'll be part of software projects and teams where people are just jerks, even if they're leaders or managers, and unfortunately we have to deal with that because money is on the line. So, again, going back to this, use whatever word, and sometimes it's imperfect.
Playing off of what you said there, I haven't included this in the slides, but if I'm remembering right, there's this concept of foxes and hedgehogs. This isn't necessarily for leadership styles, but it's a way people view things. So a hedgehog takes an idea and it becomes their primary worldview and how they interpret and do things. And then you have foxes where they take little different bits and pieces as they feel like it applies. And in terms of being able to predict events, like statistically, people who have the fox mindset of, well, I'll use this paradigm, this frame of reference now, but I don't think that's appropriate for this project, and they switch, they actually tend to have better results than the hedgehogs. But don't 100% quote me on that, because all of this is sort of like social sciences, and I'm not sure how solid that science is.
I guess just a touch on that, but like, yeah, I think, what is about competence, right? It works pretty well for like these 4-person projects, like software engineering classes or whatever. But when it gets like a bigger project, just having maybe competence isn't enough. That was mentioned, like you need people from other fields as well to like give the project some vision. there's also like, you know, software engineers are good at coding, but they're not entirely the best at like seeing things from like business perspective, or it's not like the vision of the project.
Right. Did you want to add, Marcos?
Yeah, so the way I think of it is all those different like parts work together. Like usually if someone is competent with something, that usually leads to them becoming an authority on that specific topic, which will then cause other people to become interactive with that one person, which also then becomes that person tends to have a vision going forward now that he has groups around him. It's like one builds off of the other.
Right, absolutely. Since I don't think I've spoken about myself yet, I think my primary form of leadership is actually competence. When I started the club, I really focused on workshops and skills. If I had to pick one, that's what I'd pick. But like Marcos was saying, and multiple of you, all of them sort of interact. You have strengths, you have weaknesses, you can use a combination of those. Now we're going to move on to the activities.